Yo. Welcome to the Rock in Pantown, and it's great to be together again. I want to look at the life of Jeremiah. If we read Jeremiah chapter 1, I'm just going to read the first 5 verses, and I don't know whether I pronounce the names correctly. The words of Jeremiah, the son of Hilkiah, of the priests who were in Anatoth in the land of Benjamin, in whom the word of the Lord came in the days of Josiah, the son of Amon, king of Judah, in the 13th year of his reign. It also came in the days of Joachim, the son of Josiah, king of Judah, until the end of the 11th year of Zedekiah, the son of Josiah, king of Judah, until the carrying away of Jerusalem captive in the 5th month. The word of the Lord came to me, saying, this is now Jeremiah speaking, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I sanctified you. I ordained you to be a prophet to the nations. Jeremiah is telling the people what God had said to him. And if we look at Moses and David and Caleb, we get a lot of their lineage. Moses, we know where he was born, what happened to him, where he grew up. David was the same, Abraham, Caleb, all these people, we know a lot about them. And yet Jeremiah is one that just seems to appear, if I can say that. They do give a bit of a background, but there's not much information given about Jeremiah. And the word of God came to Jeremiah in the days when the spiritual conditions, and I was very interested to hear Jim talk about the spiritual conditions of Israel. Conditions of Judah were on the outrageous, shameful, and wicked idolatry worship at that time. And so Jeremiah is born into this, a system of sacrificing children, shameful and wicked. The children were sacrificed to the god Molech in the village of Hammon, just outside of Jerusalem. And here is a city that is full of God's people, and this is what is carrying on. Hezekiah led in the reforms and cleanup, but his son Manasseh then takes over and continues to foster child sacrifice, along with gross idolatry, which continued into Jeremiah's time. So Jeremiah is born into this time. So you must understand what his background, as far as one can understand it, is going on. Many also worshipped the Queen of Heaven, and after Josiah's reform reached their apex, forced a repressing of all the wicked ways outwardly, but the deadly cancer was already there. You know, you can take someone out of their environment, but their environment will always, and you can take people out of a sinful way, but unless the inside, I can stop doing the idolatry and all of that, but unless my inside has been changed. And that's what hadn't happened. It hadn't happened. And so religion's insincerity, dishonesty, adultery, injustice, tyranny against the helpless become the norm again. Does it sound like our world today? Does it not sound like our world today? And into this world arena, Joshua is born. And we are also told what God is doing. God is speaking to Jeremiah. Before Jeremiah knew God, God knew Jeremiah. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. This turns things around a lot. We think that God is someone we have questions about, we are curious about, we make inquiries about, we read books about, we pop into church every so often to hear about, and we look at amazing sunsets. We saw, now that it gets light later, we saw the sunrise the other morning, and the clouds were pink right across the sky. It was too beautiful. Sunsets are gorgeous. We look at flowers. flowers always fascinate me because that's God's creation and their colors and how God forms them. And there's so many flowers, even the little wild ones. I take our little dog for a walk, and there's tiny, tiny little flowers like that, but such detail in them. It's amazing. They're weeds, but they're beautiful. And we hear symphonies, and we get very reverent for God. But long before we did any of that, before we were a twinkle in our parents' eyes, God knew you. If we can just comprehend, God knew you. Before we were formed in the womb, God knew us. We were known before we were known, before we know. Before it crossed our minds that God might be important, God singled us out as important. The mistake we make is to begin with ourselves and not God. God is the center from which our lives develop, not us, not our center. If we use our ego to plot the center from which we direct our lives, we will be in trouble. We enter a world we didn't create. We grew into life already provided for us. We arrive in a complex of relationships with the wills and destinies that are already in full operation before we get introduced. Can we comprehend that? We just grow up, we're in a family, there's mom and dad and brother and sister. It's already there provided for us. If we're going to live correctly, we must be aware that we are living in the middle of a story. We didn't arrive at the beginning of the world. We've arrived near the end of the world with what's going on today. And you see, that story is going to be concluded. And when it's concluded, it'll be God who's doing the concluding. My identity does not begin when I begin to understand myself or find myself or do whatever it is about myself. The same with Jeremiah. Jeremiah's life didn't start with Jeremiah. Jeremiah's salvation didn't start with Jeremiah. Jeremiah's truth didn't start with Jeremiah. Every single bit of it started with God. Before you were born, I consecrated you. This means before Jeremiah was even born, he was set apart. He was set apart, what for? For God's side. It means we are not just a cog in a wheel or a note on a piano. That wheel goes round and round, and that cog is in that wheel. It's not a note on a piano just to play the latest tune. It means we are chosen out of the stream. Remember that. We're taken out of that stream for something that is important, that God is doing. It's not us. It's God doing. What is God doing? God is saving. God is rescuing. God is blessing. God is providing. God is judging. God is healing. God is enlightening. God is for life and against death. God is for love and against hate. God is for hope and against despair. God is in heaven and against hell. And God is against fear because he gives us peace. Jeremiah, before he was born, was listed on God's side. God had worked specifically for him. He wanted to give him a few years. He wasn't given a few years to think, oh, well, maybe I should, maybe I shouldn't. Let's see what else I can do. He was already chosen. He was already chosen for God's work. So are we all. No one enters life as a spectator. We cannot say, hold on, not quite ready, wait until I've sorted things out. It's not in God's plan. Chosen. Ever been in the position as a child in teams? You know, when teams are chosen, you're the last one standing, and no captains really want you. But not with God. You're not a zero, nor are you a minus. God says, I have set you apart for a place that only you can fill. No one can be a substitute for me. Hallelujah, aren't you glad? Before I was good for anything, God decided I was good for what he was doing. Remember that. Don't think you're insignificant. Don't think there's no part that God has for you. God has a part for you, for what he is doing. God is out to win the world in love, and each one of us has been selected in the same way that Jeremiah was. God doesn't wait to see how we turn out to decide. Before we were born, God chose us for his army. I have appointed you as a prophet to the nations. Go out into all the world and preach the gospel. I give you as a prophet to the nations. You're set aside. You're a prophet to the nations. How many times in your life has someone been there for you? Word of encouragement, cup of tea and a chat. Whatever you needed at that moment, God gave you in the form of a person. God had set that person aside for you at that time. God is God's way. He gives generously. God is not a miser. When he gives generously. God did this with his own son. He gave him to the nations of the world as a sacrifice for their sins. And you know, when you think of what's going on today, with all the horror that's going on, that Jesus bore on the cross, what agony, what absolute agony he must have had. God didn't keep Jesus in heaven saying, this is my son, and I'm not sharing him. I'm not sending him to the world because they will despise him. They will reject him. They won't believe him. They'll mock him. They'll beat him. They'll nail him to the cross with a crown of thorns on his head. God didn't do that. He gave generously, gave his son to do that for us. We live in a giving world. You think, really? Giving world? When everyone is doing their own thing in their own way. We see a lot of distorted, misshapen, crippled lives among those who try to defy the reality of the life that all life is about, is giving. You see, God gave you ears, he gave you eyes, he gave you limbs. The very breath that I'm using now to speak comes from God. Every moment we have is from God. The brain sending out the message to my arms and my legs and my feet to move part of my body is God giving me life. It's God giving you life. We're given to families. We're given to neighbors. We're given to neighbors. We're given to friends. And many critical things happen before I was conceived and born that predetermine the reality of life that I have and still will experience. Biological things that make me a biped. Means that I'm not like a fish that swims. Geographically provides me a temperature zone that's not of the ice age. And with the weather now, we're quite glad of that. Scientific things that I can see a doctor. Most important is that God did provide for me where I was born. God knew me. Therefore, I am not an accident. God chose me. Therefore, I cannot be a zero or a minus. Jeremiah could have stayed on the dead-end street of the town where he was born. He could have knuckled down in the security of his father's priesthood. He could have conformed to the habits of his culture. He didn't. He believed what he had been told about his background, that God gave, and God appointed him as a prophet to the nations. He believed what God had told him. I formed you in the womb. I knew you before you were born, and I set you apart. I ordained you as a prophet to the nations. And with that, Jeremiah obeyed. I want to tell you a story of little birds, a long way from Jeremiah. But in the rocks, there's above the sea, there's crevices, And in these crevices were swallows. And the swallow, Daddy and Mommy Swallow, were flying round and round, and they were coming back, and they were filling the 3 crevices of mouths that were open for the food. And this went on for a few weeks, and the little babies got bigger and bigger. And then one day, the 3 little babies came out on the branch. It was sticking out from the rocks. And Mommy and Daddy again were feeding them round and round. They'd swoop down, find insects, and the little mouths would open. And then they must have got tired and thought, blow this, it's time they learned to do this themselves. And so they came and they edged the one little bird off, and it was happy to fly. You see, birds have feet, they can walk. They have talons that they can hang on to the branch of the trees. And when they go off, then they learn to fly. And that's when they be birds. That's when they reach the fullness of being a bird. And so the second one was nudged off, and he went off quite happily. But the third one was nervous. And so got nudged, and he got to the end, and he clung a bit more, and then he slightly loosened, and he swung round, and he's hanging like this on the branch of the tree, kind of, help me, have pity on me. But no mercy. He was pecked and pecked, and eventually he let go. And he had to learn to fly between that and the water beneath him, and he learned to fly. And you know, sometimes we're in a situation where we don't want to fly. We don't want to learn to fly. But you see, God is nudging us. God is nudging us. And I'm saying today, is God nudging you to do something that he has set you apart to do? Have you asked God, what do you want me to do? What have you set me apart for to do? And you see, sometimes we're sitting, our armchair is so comfortable. In cold weather, it's even more comfortable. Blanket round us. I don't want to. God's pecking at you. You see, as the birds are on their full bird life, flying, we're in our full life when we're flying for God. When we're going out and we're doing what God has required us to do. When we go out, we don't even have to go out. There's some who can't, but you can pray. There's a world out there that is needing prayer. Israel is needing prayer. I was thinking as I was writing this, I read an article actually in between writing this in the newspaper. Between, I think it was 2016 and 2017, there were 10 million people with a low level of food. Now today, it's increased by 80 million of people in needing food. There are thousands out there that don't have food. There are thousands that are gender-based violence. We get it on our TV all the time. Can't we pray for those people? Pray for the people that are looking after them, that are doing the work. Steph told me about a little school that's just been opened for children. 8, is it, Steph? 8 children in the school? Oh, there might be more. Any rate, these little children come from very, very impoverished homes. They can't see properly and they can't hear properly. And yet they're taken to a school, and someone has started that school because they themselves are impaired, eyesight and ears. And so pray for them, pray for the workers. We can hear all the time about a need. Even if we just begin to pray, and then even ask God, show me what I can do. Show me where I can go. Show me the next person that you even want me to smile at and say, have a lovely day. We just so need to be out there and to show God has set us in a place. He's given us, he knew us, he knows us. He knows all about, all you see today is a slice of my life. It's been 80 years getting here. But you see, you don't see my childhood. You don't see what has come before, the same as I don't see you. Same as we didn't see Jeremiah. We see Moses and Abraham, and you can tell speaking to people, we can speak to Scottish people and we'll know they're from Scotland. And my brother-in-law was from Scotland and he lived in South Africa for 21 years. To the day he died, I said, Ian, please speak English. I cannot understand you. And we have the different, and then we have the Irish, and we just we just don't understand them at all. They're different. But you see, each one of us, that's what I'm saying, each one of us come from a different background. But wherever we come from, God knew you, and he has a place especially for you. Amen.